actually has a little makeup kit for this.
Yeah, I guess when you're used to doing it all, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just going to wait a second here for a few people to jump on. All right, we're just firing up Rumble, YouTube, and Facebook. And later we'll put it on the other platforms. I'll do that. All right, I'm going to get started. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, freedom-loving human beings around the world, please give a warm welcome to the show, Tom Marazzo. Tom, thanks for being here. Can you give us a quick, brief description of who you are and what kind of background you come from? I also forgot to mention that Tom is from Niagara, so we got to give you a huge shout out from that because we all know that we love people from Niagara. So yeah, Tom, give us a quick little rundown of what you did in life and yeah.
Sure. So anyway, thanks for finally having me on. I know, Rob, you know, I've been trying to do this for quite a while. So yes, I am born and raised in Niagara Falls. So really between Niagara Falls and St. Catharines. And I've got family that live in both cities. And I'm actually there in the Niagara region every other weekend, actually. So I do get to Niagara quite often. So I actually went to Niagara College the first time around in school. Back in the early 90s, I went to Niagara College. And in 1998, I actually joined the regular force military, but I was a reservist since 1990 with the Lincoln and Welland Regiment in St. Catharines. So I actually worked out of both armories. When there was an armory in Niagara Falls and on Victoria Street, and then they closed it down, but that was after I was already gone to the regular force. But in 1998, I joined the regular force as a combat engineer officer. And I retired from the military in 2015, went back to school, did a degree in software, was teaching at Georgian College right after that. So 2019, of course, the vaccine mandates came out, just about a year and a half later. And so I pushed back and said, no, I'm not, I think what you guys are doing is pretty immoral. And from what I can tell, it's pretty illegal as well. But obviously, I lost that battle because about 4 days later, I got fired for cause. And I lost my appeal because this summer I was running in the Ontario election with the Ontario Party, and I lost the appeal because the election was called on a Thursday. I found out I was in a debate on Tuesday. And I was doing debate prep that day, and the lawyers for my arbitration for my firing from Georgian College were trying to get me to go to this arbitration. I said, you've got to get it postponed, because they had already gotten it postponed 2 other times. So I thought, well, I should get a postponement, right? It's only fair. And they refused to give me a postponement, so I couldn't go. And I don't think the lawyers were all that interested in representing me anyway, because I was on the phone with them. And I had no impression whatsoever that the lawyer or the union had any interest in winning this case for me. But I lost. It's public record. People have looked it up just as a means to smear me, whatever. But yeah, I lost that. And, obviously I participated in the convoy. I was asked to come to the convoy through various friends, and I ended up being brought here by Canada Unity. And I got here, and I was here for 22 days during the convoy itself. And no, I didn't start the convoy. I came here like a volunteer, just like everybody else when I was asked. And it's funny terminology, right? Because we're watching the inquiry. And when we get into terminology, it gets a little tricky, right? You don't want to say that you're the leader. You don't want to say you're the organizer, because the reality is this was a grassroots movement. I mean, people started it. People took organizational roles.
Yeah, I think it's important. That's what I wanted to say. I put the title on this as, Tom Marazzo, Freedom Convoy. I don't know if I put leader or organizer or whatever. And and I realize that's not the case. It's what they just give you these titles, and that's what people know you as. It's like these names that they call us that we're not. It's so weird. Some people just embrace the names, and some people
Yeah.
don't.
I'm happy. I'm happy with Tom Marazzo fringe majority. I'm
Yep.
happy with that.
I think the gentleman that called us all a fringe minority found out really quick that this wasn't
Yeah.
a small fringe by minority by any means. And we've even heard people, police officers now testify um, that they think that that probably just added fuel to the fire.
Yeah.
When we realized that there's a lot of Canadians who were upset about what was going on in our country, and people who are upset when you're gaslighting them and calling them names, you're only adding fuel to the fire that's burning inside them. Wouldn't you agree?
Mhm. Absolutely, I would agree. And if you Trucking for Freedom episode 2 came out, I got a copy of it today. I've watched the first 30 minutes of it, and it's incredible. I mean, we have people that I worked with in Ottawa, personal friends of mine, that were saying, like, the government did a great job of implementing fifth generation warfare against the Canadian society. And if you watch Trucking for Freedom, you'll get a better sense of what that really is, fifth gen warfare, which is basically using social media and various media platforms to influence those people that are desirable within your society and those that are the ruling class. And so, we saw classic examples of fifth generation warfare being waged against the Canadian public. If we were in Afghanistan or something like that, we'd be using fifth gen warfare. But instead, our government engaged in that against us. And I don't mean to say, I don't want to suggest, yes, I was a career military guy, but I'm not a combat veteran or anything. I'm not an expert in influence activities. I'm just aware of these things as a matter of needing to know what they are. But I'm not an expert in it. But I've talked to people that are experts in fifth gen warfare, and our government conducted fifth gen warfare against its own population.
Absolutely. And they really twisted our words, because I know there's been some veterans that have come out and said things like, we want to get through this with love and peace and in awareness. So, the last thing in the world we would ever want to see is a civil war. And
Mhm.
of course, when people say things like that, they clip that soundbite, just civil war, and they don't show what was leading up to it, and show that people like yourself, people like myself, people like the people who are watching the stream right now are willing to do anything to get through this issue, just simply through peace, information, and learning from the past mistakes that we've done.
Well, that's absolutely true, because when James Topp and I and Dr. Paul Alexander met with the federal MPs, at the end of the day, we were scrummed by the mainstream media, and they took everything that we said or that I said and absolutely distorted what the main message was. James Topp told a story during those meetings with the MPs where he said, look, he was in the Medak pocket. Okay, in that time, it was heavy combat in the streets between the Canadians and their opposition. I'm not going to say who it is because but the Medak pocket is a pretty famous battle that the Canadians were involved in the former Yugoslavia. And the thing James had stated to them, he says, what really struck me is we came to a bombed out building, and what he realized is that their dinner table was still set, and there was food on the plate, and there was drinks in the glass, kind of thing. And he said what he realized was that they had just sat down to eat, and like that, they were running for the hills. Right? That's how fast that war kicked off, and how that conflict kicked off in his thing. And he was saying that as he was traveling across Canada, he was hearing the same sort of level of fear in people's voices when he was walking across Canada, meeting Canadians. Canadians are afraid, and they were quite afraid at the time when James started walking right after, on February 20th, the day after the police in this Ottawa broke up the convoy with violence. And he was walking, talking to ordinary Canadians, and he was hearing the same stuff that he heard when he was a young soldier in the former Yugoslavia. And that's the message he was trying to convey. There was an elevated sense of fear in this country, and it has been brought to us by the federal government of Canada and law enforcement. And the willingness of law enforcement and the willingness of the government to bring that level of violence against its own people. And That was the message. But what did the media do? We used the term civil war, and that was the soundbite. That's what they made the story out of. And then I see somebody like Evan Solomon on his show saying, we're talking about civil war. It's like, that's not what we're talking about, dumbass.
No, it's really not. And, I'm not too sure. You were a part of a podcast last night that I jumped on, and I actually left a comment on there. And I don't think I've ever got to tell you this, Tom, so I wouldn't mind telling you quick here. Mm-hmm. When I was in Ottawa, obviously there was a lot of people who were frustrated with the media and mainstream media and the narrative they've painted. I've done everything as far as email, go to offices, tried to reach out to people, to hear our side of the story, as you have as well. And when I was in Ottawa, I seen Evan Solomon on the ground. Mm-hmm. And, as frustrated as I was with him, I went up to him and I shook his hand and I introduced myself. And I said to him, Evan, I would love the opportunity to do an interview with you. I said, you're here kind of, taking advantage of vulnerable people who are very upset, getting these little screen grabs and whatever. I said, a lot of people know who I am. And I think, it would be great if you would give me an interview and actually air, mm-hmm. a little clip of it or something. And, he seemed hesitant and he goes, yeah, let's do it. And I was telling the crowd around me, I know you guys are frustrated with him. We all are, but he's giving us an opportunity to talk now. So let's ease up a little bit and show a little bit of respect and whatnot. So I did an interview with Evan Solomon for about 45 minutes, Tom. And, I got his number. He got my number. I said, anytime you want to talk to me, I'm more than willing to talk about this kind of stuff. We need to talk about it in the mainstream media. Thanks, Rob. He played me like a fiddle, Tom. Yeah. I went home and I watched the news at nighttime, and the only part I was on the news is when the police set off like a noise boom or something like that, and it startled me like that. And he used that clip that wasn't even a second long of the blast and me just going like that. And that's all I got. And I thought, a lot of people would have never gave him the time of the day and were very ignorant to him, rightfully so. And now I understand, after taking myself out of that position and trying so hard to just have an honest interview with him. And I really think that I represented our movement in Canada so well that he simply just didn't want it aired.
I agree with that. I mean, the day that James and I had met and Paul Alexander met with the MPs, we were going to the parking garage. I actually ran into him. The three, James and I and Christian, there was the three of us, ran into him in the elevator. And, James really wasn't all that interested in talking to him, but I kind of, just like you, I kind of had that, let's see where this goes a little bit. And, there was no interview, nothing. We just had a casual conversation off the record, right in front of an elevator. And a few days later, I see him talking to Candace Bergen on his show. And he's saying, I know Tom Marazzo. I've talked to him, making it sound as if though there was some sort of a relationship or an interview or anything. I'm like, that's not how it goes. In fact, I've got the text still where I'm basically expressing my displeasure at the lies he's telling. Right. And, he is, these guys are masters at political commentary and manipulation of the truth. That's what they do for a living. They get paid lots of money to frame a narrative that is against one group or another. And so we're not, it's, going into an arena with Evan Solomon would be like me stepping into a ring with Mike Tyson, right? I don't have nearly the same skill set at him in framing lies. So, I expect at some point, if the mainstream media bothers to show up for the inquiry, because I took a picture yesterday as I was leaving of the media room, and the media room is almost as big as the room that we're using for the actual inquiry. And there was 3 people in there. So there's no interest in the mainstream media to cover this story right now, because why? The truth is coming out. They don't want to cover it. But here's the beauty. They don't want to cover the truth, which means they're not actually here to report lies. So it's people like you and the other alternative media that are out there able to actually tell what's going on. And that's an advantage I find for us. And, at some point, I'm sure they'll ramp up the rhetoric of the lies when it's convenient for them.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And I mean, that's why I'm doing this right now. And it's going to work. That's the best part about it. You look at these YouTube channels, let's drop the war campaign, Clyde do something.
Yeah.
These people like this, these are just ordinary people who are upset with what's gone on in their country. And they're like, well, you know what? The news isn't covering this. We can't get it out there. So we're just going to start a channel and do our best job. And these people have 100,000 people on YouTube channels. These people have more people on there than the mainstream channels have on their channel who are being funded by the state. So it's incredible work being done by all of them. But, Tom, me and you could go on and just talk all day, and we'll do that at the right time. I know you're a busy man right now, so I figure we'll shift gears right now and just jump right into it. So you're in Ottawa right now, patiently waiting to testify at the Public Order Emergency Commission. I already know the answer to this question, but for the viewers, I'm going to ask, in your opinion, do you think the Emergency Measures Act was justified or needed in Ottawa to bring this protest to a halt?
Absolutely not. And we knew even before they invoked it that the government of Canada could not meet the basic threshold of invoking it. And that's why we were so surprised that he actually did it. And I was sitting with Brian Peckford and Keith Wilson and Eva and Tamara, and we were all sitting in the room talking. And that's when we learned that he actually invoked the Emergency Act. So imagine, being in a room with somebody who actually was one of the writers or the drafters of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms in the exact moment you just found out you lost your Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
And can I ask, that was probably Brian Peckford, correct?
Yes, Brian Peckford, okay. Yes.
Keep going.
Yep. And so, kind of the look on his face and the look on, I think, everybody's face, there's a moment of silence of kind of shock. It's like, he actually did it. And we couldn't, it was just kind of shock, I think, around the room that he did it. And then I think the reality of we all realized how far this guy's willing to go to get his way. And so, for the viewers, I want to kind of unpack a level of sophistication in what's going on in the trial that I was not aware of either. Because as I sit there and I watch it in the early days, and people get really emotional and they're like, yeah, well, what about this question, or ask that question? Because they're listening to testimony and they're sending, they're posting questions and messages. And I'm like, yeah, exactly. That's what I was thinking. But here's the big thing. This is when you watch Brendan Miller do his cross-examinations. So just to back it up, after the first day, I was pretty upset. I come back to where we're all staying, and I'm talking to Brendan Miller and Keith Wilson, and I was frustrated by what I was hearing. And he says, look, everything you're talking about is emotional. Everything you're talking about, you're trying to win an argument. What we're looking at is relevance. Was it relevant? And yeah, that's Keith Wilson he was here with us in Ottawa the entire time I was here, Keith and Eva Chipiuk. So here's what I learned. And I kind of knew this, but now I'm fully up to date on it. And I would encourage any of the viewers to go back and look at Brendan Miller's opening statements. Okay, so when they talk about relevance, here's the caveat to this. In order to invoke the Emergencies Act, you must meet one of the four standards or the four pillars of Section 2 of the CSIS Act. So you can look it up online. I don't know what the four pillars are, but when Brendan Miller got up and he did his opening statements, he outlined those four things. And he says, you're not going to hear evidence of basically pillar A. You're not going to hear evidence of B, C, and D. That's how we laid out the argument, because this is when he's talking about it. All the testimony we hear, was it relevant? Did we ever meet one of those four standards? And the answer is no. We have not met any of those 4 standards under the CSIS Act. Now, you could, if you even hit one of the 4, you can invoke the Emergencies Act. But we didn't meet one of those 4. And so the Emergency Act should have never been used under the CSIS Act or Section 2. And that's why when they talk about it, they're talking about relevance. So all the testimony, yes, it's emotional. I mean, I get there, I sit in the audience and I hear people lying about me, or lying about Tamara, or lying about what happened at the convoy. But is it relevant to the actual commission itself? Should they have used the Emergency Act? And the answer is no. And as far as I'm concerned, there was no justification 10 months ago or 9 months ago, but I'm sitting there and today is day 7 of testimony. And I can tell you by day 4, I knew there was no justification. The evidence was already presented.
Yeah, and you can see that, a lot of people who probably don't understand the process are probably thinking, Miller asked kind of the same general questions, but he's knocking it out of the park, in my opinion, because like you said, these thresholds you need to hit, we're talking about things like espionage,
yes,
terrorism, extreme violence. Like, these are reasons. So like Tom just stated, if they didn't meet this threshold, that's all that needs to be said. There's a lot of people that are dancing around all of this and talking about a lot of things, because there's a lot of people who did things wrong that are going to want to paint a better picture for themselves. But we, the people of, Canadians at the Freedom Convoy, we don't have to paint this picture because we're not in the position that they're in. We're just trying to justify that this Emergency Act was invoked and it wasn't necessary. Now, on that note, Tom, can I get you to explain a little bit? I know on the Monday, don't quote me, I believe it was the Monday, before they invoked the Emergency Act, there was a plan in place by organization that I believe was going to work out perfectly. Why did this plan fall through? And yeah, what happened from here?
Are you referring to the plan to move?
Yes.
Yeah. So let me kind of set the groundwork for this to answer this question. Mayor Watson was hedging his bets on both potential outcomes. And ultimately, if you listen to the testimony, every public elected servant that has testified so far, you get this clear picture that their entire intention, the only single option that they wanted to explore, was to give themselves extraordinary powers to break this convoy up with laws, with police, and with violence if necessary. That's what the politicians wanted. They had no interest. I have yet to hear any discussion about any elected official wanting to talk to any of us. Okay, so that's an interesting dynamic. If you listen to the police or the unelected public servants so far, their testimony is actually very beneficial to us because they're confirming the things we've been saying since we were in Ottawa. And it's very damning to the government. Now, public servants, one of their roles is to set the conditions for an elected official to make a decision, right? So they put everything into place to put these people in a position to make final decisions, except they dropped the ball on the 1 yard line every chance they possibly got. And now when you're listening to the testimony, what you're hearing is the elected officials are blaming each other. The public servants are saying, if it wasn't for the political interference, we could have actually been more successful. So I want to kind of set that stage there. We had a deal with Jim Watson, okay? And here's the issue with this deal. What we said was, we will take this deal back to each individual trucker. We'll make the case for why this is beneficial to the overall convoy. What we'll never be able to do, what we can't do, is order the truckers to move, right? We can't do that. Nobody had any command authority over any truckers.
Jess, can you get the dog?
We made the case why it was good for us and whether the truckers complied or not. That's what we were working towards. But we had two occasions where basically we were on the 1 yard line getting ready to move these trucks. And on the one case, the police backed out of the deal. There was a lot of infighting inside the Ottawa police, and they're the ones who scuttled the deal literally like the last second. There was another incident the next day where we got the deal again. The truckers were going to move in front of the Rideau. They had decided they were going to move. The police came in to move the concrete barriers. The public intervened because the public thought that the concrete barriers were being moved because the police were going to go in and attack the truckers. So, two instances where there was an appetite from the truckers to actually move up onto Wellington. But at the end of the day, Jim Watson was hedging his bets. He was using the political angle to try to manipulate us in the media. And then he was also putting himself in a position hoping that he would get the Emergency Act so he could just go in and kick the crap out of anybody so that he could get what he wanted.
Yeah, the politics behind all of this is insane. We have a mayor election coming up in Ottawa. I've been tuned into. Wow, it's pretty wild. I guess on that note, what did you think? I want to ask because I have my own opinion. It was very hard for me to watch City Councillor Mathieu Fleury and Catherine McKenney live on the stand the other day.
Yeah.
Man, how was that to watch in person? How do you feel about their testimonies? And, I mean, I don't want to give you too many questions at once, but like Fleury is an incumbent. He's been on council for 12 years now in our capital city. Do you think that maybe he could have had some better planning in place with the amount of protests that go on in this city?
Yeah, I that was my observation too. My first impression was he started off being, confident to the point where he transitioned to becoming incredibly smug. His arrogance really came through. His lack of understanding of what was going on with the reason for the protest to begin with. He had no interest whatsoever in the protest. All he cared about was his own ward. He had no interest in outside of his bubble. And so that became very apparent, right? He was one of the big proponents for using extraordinary or giving the police as many resources and extraordinary powers as they could. And when it came time to discussing his own ineptitude, then he started to blame other people. But the extreme arrogance of this guy when he got up there and his English is so good. I had no idea that he was his first official language was French. I had no idea. And then for him to go and pull the French language card because Brendan asked him a basic, simple question: what is a microaggression? And then he started to play games, and then McKenney, or whatever her name is, she started playing childish, embarrassing games on the stand, and I could see that Justice Rouleau was not very impressed. It was embarrassing.
He wasn't very impressed. And now, before I forget, you just mentioned Justice Rouleau, sorry. Yeah. He was very genuine asking a question there at the end. I'm going to be completely honest and say I was totally surprised. And I was happy to see that he asked the question he did. Do you recall what the question was?
On which day?
It was. I think it was yesterday, or was it the day before?
Was it to the OPP intelligence, Pat Moore?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's what I took too. Is if you watch, so what Justice Rouleau's, this is his job, right? He weighs the credibility of the person that is speaking on the stand. That's what he's trying to assess. Are you a credible person? So, Rob, if you and I are both on the stand, or you give testimony and says, yes, I saw a dog walk down the street. I, too, give the same testimony. He's going to look at the both of them and say, okay, is Rob's more credible than what Tom said, or which one is more credible? And, is the person forthright and truthful? That's one criteria, but is what he's saying credible too? And so that's what he's looking for when he hears the testimony. And what I observed is that when he sees somebody that we know is exaggerating all sorts of ridiculous falsehoods, I get the impression he's playing solitaire on his computer. But when you get a guy like Superintendent Pat Morris, he was fully engaged. He was listening. And then towards the end, he asked some very, very specific, really good questions for clarification. So you can tell in his body language the level of credibility that he is giving to the witnesses that are up there saying stupid things or great things.
Yeah, and for anyone who may have missed that, it just came back to my memory. What he asked was, he was asking Craig, I think it was Craig Abrams. He was asking him, how did he say it? He said, he said, was there any in between? Like, instead of just going to this Emergency Measures Act, was there ever any compromise, like in a way to have the protesters still out there, but not the vehicles? And I believe the answer was something along the lines of like we realized that now kind of thing. After this happened, because when I left that convoy, one of the biggest questions in my head that really scared me is, I'm not going to say it's right what they did, but I can see how the city was starting to get frustrated with the lanes, even though there was emergency lanes open with the cars parked on the road. I can see how that can cause some issues. But with that being said, you and I both know those vehicles were cleared off the street. And when there was just people left, people were being assaulted by the police.
Yep. Yeah. And I watched a video the other day, and somebody slowed it down, and I didn't realize. So it was near the National War Memorial. And I hope the viewers have seen it, but you see a police officer, he's on his knees and he's got his rifle and he's hammering somebody who's on the ground. You don't see the person on the ground, but I saw that video in slow motion the other day, and I realized, I thought they were using the butt of the weapon. In fact, they were using the tip of the barrel that they were hammering into somebody who was being subdued on the ground. This was the level of violence that some of the police in Ottawa were willing to bring. Not all, but many. And
yeah, for sure. It's important to say not all, because, I've been pretty damn upset with the police. I'm not going to hide that, but I do appreciate some honesty and integrity now that I see how some of these officers are testifying. You just mentioned a moment ago about how Justice Rouleau has a job to do, how he's listening to this story and listening to that story. I was very upset when I heard Patricia Ferguson testify. And now that you presented it that way, I think about how there was 3 police officers interviewed so far. 2 of them were on the same page.
Yes.
And 1 of them wasn't.
Yep.
So obviously, anyone who's looking into this is going to be able to see that the one person who wasn't on the same page, there could be politics involved. I can't speculate what it is, but there's something there.
There's a big difference too between what was happening with the OPP versus the Ottawa Police Services. And the OPS had an enormous amount of internal infighting. I mean, they fired their police services board chief, police chief slowly resigned, and we heard in testimony, because I always thought that was weird, he actually did quit. He just gave up. And then they put in another guy, but he said, no way am I going there. He was supposed to come from Waterloo, and he's like, forget that. And then they put Bell in there, and Bell was more than willing to do whatever the politician said they wanted to do, right? And there was an enormous amount of infighting with the Ottawa police. In fact, from what I listened to, I believe there was 2 incident commanders that got rotated out because they were just too horrible to work with. And so there's a huge contrast between Ottawa police leadership and what was happening with the OPP. The issue is that the Ottawa Police Service is the police of jurisdiction. They're the lead police department, for that entire event. And I tell you, it was a huge, huge contrast between Ottawa police and OPP. And again, I listened to Ferguson give her testimony as well, and there was things that she said that I thought were really, really questionable, and did not at all support the evidence that we had previously heard. We know that the crime in the city went down by 90%. 90%. She got on the stand and said, no, that's not true. It actually went up. And we were like, no, that's not true. And Eva Chipiu posted on social media all of the arrests by type of crime. And then the deputy chief Ferguson, she said, well, these were all arrests that were after the Emergency Act was invoked. It's like, okay, but we're talking about the decision to invoke the Emergency Act. So you were seeing violent crime before the Emergency Act was invoked, and she said yes, but the evidence is already been factually submitted, and she did not tell the truth at all, or she just didn't understand the facts. And it's not true what she said, even remotely. Violent crime, or all crime, dropped in the city 90% during the convoy, up to the 14th of February when the Emergency Act was invoked. Now you're getting mass arrests because the police have all these extraordinary powers. Now you can say that, hey, in those last 2 days, we arrested 400 people. But what we're getting at is, what were the actions of the protesters prior to the 14th that justified or didn't justify the Emergency Act? So as far as I'm concerned, she got up there and lied.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. And it's important to note that some of these charges they spoke about yesterday have already been dropped as well. So it's like, were these charges laid? So when something like this happens, there's something to speak to, but they actually don't hold any value in the court of law.
Right. And these lawsuits are going to be unpacked, I think, for a long time. Or sorry, these court cases, not the lawsuits, but those will come after, I'm sure. Because I know that there are many lawsuits against the government, against the police for their actions in February. Under section, so what we're dealing with too in the Emergency Act is section 63. 63, if you invoke the Emergency Act, you must hold an inquiry. This is what we're doing right now. Section 62 deals with something called a judicial review. This is similar in nature to lawsuits. So you have to bring file almost like it's very similar to a lawsuit, but almost file a judicial review in court. And that's what Brendan Miller and Bathsheba are also involved with, representing Eddie Cornell, Vince Gersey's as a Niagara former OPP. So
my vote.
They sued the Ontario government under this judicial review because of what happened on those last 2 days in Ottawa. So that is also part of the Emergency Act legislation. 62 is like a lawsuit. It's not a lawsuit, but it's similar. And then 63 is what we're participating in right now here in Ottawa.
Right.
It's amazing what you learn by staying in an apartment with 7 lawyers.
I can imagine you're going to be pretty well polished by the time this commences, Tom. Okay, well, I'm going to try and, jump on with you. I'm going to be bugging you, Tom, maybe every 10 days. We won't do it like this. I know you're a busy man. Maybe we can jump on for a quick 10 minutes or something. But before we wrap this up, where can people find you on the internet if they want to follow you?
I am on Twitter. I do have a webpage. It's just tommarazzo.ca. I'm on Facebook. I'm pretty much on most of the platforms. I don't know. Listen, as far as Facebook, it's changed so much since I got a new account because I was off it for a few years. I don't get it. So if people send me messages through Messenger, I can't possibly keep up with that. But Twitter is usually what I use. My website is up, tommarazzo.ca. That's one way of getting a hold of me. But yeah, it's mostly the social media world.
All right, Tom, last thing I wanted to ask you is, so far this experience that you've been in, going to Ottawa, being a part of the convoy, fighting for Canadians, now this Public Order Emergency Commission, what have you taken away from this entire experience so far, and how has it made you a stronger person?
Well, the biggest thing I've taken away is that we're far from done pushing back against our government, and I will always advocate to do that peacefully, legally, in using the tools that are available to us. But I believe we are far from finished, and I don't think that it's going to be a simple fix just by replacing the Liberal government with a different government. I think it's going to be a whole of society reevaluation of who we are as a nation. And I don't know how to do that yet. I think there is obviously a political element to that. But I think the biggest thing that I always try to advocate for is that after 2.5 years of all this stuff, you've been polite. You have not discussed COVID-19 with your friends and family and coworkers. Well, guess what? It's now time to start being bold and saying, you know what? For 2.5 years, you ostracized me, and I had to listen to your rhetoric about your point of view. Now you sit down and you listen to me, because your friends and family who ostracized you, they were perfectly willing to do it. So don't be afraid to be a little bit rude and maybe even offensive. Be respectful, but don't be afraid anymore to speak your mind on what's going on in the direction of this country.
Yeah, I mean, you just nailed it, Tom. You know, the changes we need to make at home and with our neighbors and our friends and family first and foremost, so we can all be on the same team, same page. Team Canada, that is.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, local action has a national impact.
That's right. And you know, quickly here, I'll mention one thing. You tweeted something the other day. I can't recall exactly what it was, but it was something along the lines of how, you know, the provincial and federal level has let us down. I think it was like about, you know, politicians compared to local elected politicians. You know, like that's where we can make change, is at a municipal level, and there's municipal votes coming up all over this place. So make sure you guys get out there, see who's good for you, and actually vote. Tom, do you just want to mention your book quickly? When's that coming out?
So I'm hoping that it comes out. It will come out on February 14th, which is the 1-year anniversary of the Emergency Act. And the book is called The People's Emergency Act, because that's what the Convoy was. It was the Canadian People's Emergency Act. And I got that line from a good friend of mine, Sammy, who participated in Windsor on the bridge. And yeah, it's going to come out February 14th. You can learn about it on the website. I have a great team that are of phenomenal people that are helping me with this, and I am crowdfunding for it because, you know, we're putting together a good team to do this, right? And it's not, hey, I'd love to be able to do this at no cost, but that's just not realistic. And I will be publishing it on Amazon.
Yeah, it's impossible. So what's your is it a Give, Send, Go link, Tom?
It's Give, Send, Go, and if you click right on the center of the webpage, you'll see the link right there.
Okay, so Give, Send, Go / is it Tom Marazzo?
No, it's just go onto the website, tommarazzo.ca, and it'll be right there on the homepage that you can donate if you wish.
Okay, we'll wrap that up there. Tom, thanks for coming on with us. We'll do this again. And if you guys want to support Tom, I know a couple of you just asked me where to do so. You can do so on his website through the Give, Send, Go, and that can help him get his book off the ground. All right, Tom, I guess we're all going to go tune into the Public Order Emergency Commission.
All right. Thanks, Rob.
You have a good day. Thanks for coming on.
You too.
Bye now.
Bye.